April 1943. The desert stretched endlessly, a pale ocean of sand broken only by wreckage and silence. The sun was high and merciless, its heat rippling across twisted metal and burned-out tracks. A few miles outside Tunis, a column of German staff cars rolled to a halt beside something odd. A small, dust-covered American vehicle, half buried in the sand. Two generals stepped out, their boots sinking into the soft earth. One adjusted his cap, squinting at the shape before him. It looked almost comical next to their heavy Opel command car. Tiny wheels, open frame, no roof, no armor. A captured Willys Jeep, left behind after a skirmish with the U.S. II Corps. The officers circled it, chuckling quietly. "This," one of them muttered in disbelief, "is what the Americans send into battle?" Their laughter echoed briefly across the dunes, but as an engineer lifted the hood, the tone shifted. Silence fell. What they saw beneath the dust would change the way Germany viewed its enemy's war machine. In the years before the storm broke over Europe, few could have imagined that a squat, four-wheeled vehicle would come to symbolize an entire nation's approach to war. The idea of a lightweight reconnaissance car, fast, reliable, and easy to repair, was born not in the offices of generals, but in the workshops of engineers scattered across an America still shaking off the Great Depression. By 1939, Europe was already burning. The Wehrmacht's armored spearheads had cut through Poland with terrifying speed, and the world saw a new kind of warfare. Blitzkrieg, lightning war, powered by mechanization. The U.S. Army, watching from across the Atlantic, realized it was woefully unprepared. Its motor pool was a patchwork of civilian trucks and motorcycles, unreliable in mud, snow, or sand. What the Army needed was something small. A vehicle that could move men and messages faster than horses, cheaper than tanks, and through terrain where even half-tracks would bog down. In July 1940, the War Department issued a call to arms, not for soldiers, but for engineers. They sent out a set of near-impossible specifications. The vehicle must weigh less than 1,300 pounds. It must carry 600 pounds of gear. It must have four-wheel drive. It must climb a 40% grade and reach 50 miles per hour. And, most impossible of all, it had to be designed, built, and tested within 49 days. Only two small companies stepped forward: American Bantam Car Company of Pennsylvania and Willys Overland of Ohio. Bantam delivered first, a fragile prototype that barely survived its tests at Camp Holabird, Maryland. Yet the Army saw potential. They handed Bantam's blueprints to Willys and Ford to refine. Willys engineers, led by Delmar Barney Roos, replaced the engine with their rugged Go Devil four-cylinder, 60 horsepower of simplicity and strength. Ford, in turn, contributed production discipline, stamping every part with an unmistakable F for interchangeability. By the end of 1941, America had its answer: the Willys MB and the Ford GPW, twins in all but name. Soldiers soon called them Jeeps, though no one quite agreed where the name came from. Some said it was shorthand for General Purpose, GP. Others believed it was soldier slang, borrowed from Popeye's magical creature, Eugene the Jeep. Whatever the origin, the name stuck. And so did the legend. When Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7, 1941, the Jeep went to war overnight. Within months, the assembly lines at Willys and Ford were roaring, stamping out thousands of vehicles a week. By mid-1942, more than 100,000 Jeeps were rolling off American docks bound for Africa, England, and Australia. Each Jeep cost roughly $750, a fraction of the price of any tank or armored car. But its real power wasn't in armor or armament. It was in adaptability. The Jeep could carry radios, mount machine guns, tow artillery, or ferry wounded men from the front. Its small frame and low center of gravity made it a mountain climber, a swamp crawler, and a desert runner. In the hands of mechanics, it became anything: a mobile generator, a makeshift ambulance, even a field altar for chaplains. American soldiers loved it because it was dependable. Officers loved it because it multiplied their reach, and the enemy would come to respect it because it never stopped, through mud, through fire, through every season of the war. In the early months of 1943, the Jeep was everywhere in North Africa. From the battlefields of Kasserine Pass to the final push toward Tunis, the little vehicle buzzed across the desert like an army of ants, delivering ammunition, scouting enemy lines, carrying generals through dust storms and chaos. The British, too, had embraced it, painting theirs with desert camouflage and arming them for long-range patrols. To the Germans, who prized engineering precision and heavy armor, the Jeep looked almost laughable, a toy beside their ponderous Kubelwagens and armored half-tracks. But the Wehrmacht's own supply lines were crumbling under Allied air attacks and stretched logistics. The Americans, by contrast, seemed to appear and disappear with uncanny speed. Intelligence officers began asking, how do they move so fast? That question, quiet, almost rhetorical at first, would soon demand an answer. For in the spring of 1943, during the closing stages of the North African campaign, a small Allied convoy was ambushed near the village of El Guetar. Amid the burning trucks and scattered bodies lay one unassuming vehicle, a Jeep, abandoned but largely intact. German troops dragged it from the wreckage and radioed headquarters, a captured American command car. The next day, it was delivered to a German divisional staff outside Tunis for examination. A handful of generals and engineers gathered to see it, unaware that this little machine, simple as it appeared, embodied the secret behind America's growing mobility. And as they approached the vehicle, the desert heat shimmering around them, the same laughter heard in the hook returned. They still saw only a boxy toy on wheels. But that was about to change by the spring of 1943. The North African campaign was entering its final, violent phase. The Axis forces, once triumphant under Rommel's command, were collapsing. Allied troops had broken through the Mareth line and were pressing toward Tunis from the south and west. German and Italian divisions were trapped between two advancing armies, their supply routes severed, their fuel dwindling, their morale bleeding out with every mile. The desert was unforgiving. Sand-clogged engines, sun-warped metal, and the relentless wind scoured everything left exposed. For the Germans, every kilometer of retreat meant another opportunity lost, another tank abandoned for lack of fuel. And yet, the Americans and British seemed to move effortlessly across terrain that had broken armies for centuries. Observers on the ground began to notice something peculiar. Allied columns, sometimes hundreds of vehicles long, appeared in places where no road existed. Scouts reported small, agile cars darting between dunes and wadis, carrying officers, signalmen, and radio operators. These machines were not tanks, not trucks, just tiny, open-topped vehicles that seemed immune to the desert itself. By April, word had spread among German field units. The Americans have a new kind of car. When one of those cars finally fell into German hands, it was treated with curiosity rather than urgency. The capture occurred near the edge of the El Guetar Valley, an area of rocky ridges and dry riverbeds about 30 miles southwest of Gabes. The U.S. II Corps, newly reorganized after the disaster at Kasserine Pass, was driving hard against the German 10th Panzer Division. In the confusion of one dawn engagement, a forward command post had been overrun. Among the scattered equipment was a Willys Jeep, its tires shredded, its fuel tank perforated, but otherwise intact. The vehicle was hauled back to divisional headquarters on the back of a half-track. The German mechanics who unloaded it thought little of the find. It was small, unarmored, and seemed far too exposed for serious combat use. They parked it beside a row of captured British trucks and returned to work on the Panzer IVs that actually mattered. But when senior officers arrived later that day, curious about the much-talked-about American car, the Jeep drew a small crowd. A few engineers from the Heereswaffenamt, Army Weapons Office, joined them, tasked with inspecting captured Allied vehicles for intelligence purposes. They had seen British Bren carriers and American half-tracks before, but this was different. The Willies looked primitive. Canvas seats, flat panels, no real protection of any kind. To German eyes, it resembled something built for farm work, not battle. "Unbelievable," one officer remarked, tapping its thin body with a gloved hand. "They drive this into combat?" Another replied with a grin. "Perhaps it's for generals who enjoy fresh air." Laughter rippled through the group. The Germans prided themselves on mechanical perfection. Their tanks were masterpieces of engineering, their staff cars elegant and overbuilt. By comparison, this thing looked crude. But as the laughter faded, curiosity took over. The hood was unlatched and lifted. Beneath it sat the compact Go Devil engine, coated in dust but still remarkably clean. An engineer crouched beside it, tracing the simple arrangement of wires and pipes. He frowned. "Look at this," he said quietly. "Everything is accessible. Everything is labeled." That simplicity was the first surprise. The second came when they examined the suspension and frame. The Jeep's axles were heavy-duty, its springs flexible enough to absorb punishment that would cripple most vehicles. The undercarriage was high and clean. No decorative panels, no excess weight. It was built for endurance, not prestige. One mechanic reached inside and twisted the key. To everyone's amazement, the engine coughed once, then sputtered to life. A few soldiers stepped back instinctively, startled by the sudden growl. The engineer let it idle, listening. The sound was even, confident, almost cheerful. It was a design that invited abuse, and forgave it. Later that afternoon, the officers took turns driving the Jeep around the perimeter of their desert camp. It bounded over ruts and rocks with ease, its short wheelbase keeping it upright through every bump. The driver laughed as it leapt a small sandbank. "It's like a toy," he said. But when he brought it back, something in his expression had changed. "A toy," he added, "that doesn't break." That evening, the generals met in a canvas tent to discuss their findings. A report would be drafted and sent to Berlin, detailing the vehicle's construction and possible uses. Still, few grasped its significance. To most, it was an amusing curiosity, a sign of how Americans valued quantity over sophistication. But as night fell over the camp and the mechanics continued their inspection, more details emerged. A small two-way radio lay tucked under the passenger seat. A rack for mounting a machine gun was bolted behind the driver. Storage points for tools, fuel cans, and stretchers revealed a flexibility that German vehicles simply lacked. Piece by piece, the laughter that had greeted the Jeep began to fade. The engineers realized what they were looking at wasn't a toy at all. It was the embodiment of a doctrine, a philosophy of war built on mobility, simplicity, and mass production. The captured Jeep had become more than a curiosity. It was a message, and by the time that message reached Berlin, it would force the German high command to confront a truth they had long denied. The industrial heart of America was now fully awake. For the men who drove it, the Jeep was more than a vehicle. It was a companion. In every theater of war, soldiers gave it nicknames, painted their unit insignias on the hood, and treated it almost like a loyal animal. It never complained. It carried them through mud, snow, jungle, and shellfire. It delivered the mail, brought hot food to the front lines, and pulled the wounded from places no ambulance could reach. To American troops, it became a symbol of resilience. Its steering wheel was rough under the hands, its suspension bounced mercilessly, and its canvas seats were a poor defense against rain or sun. Yet it was always there, starting up at dawn, ready to move. Mechanics joked that you could strip a Jeep to its frame, rebuild it blindfolded, and still drive it by nightfall. The Germans who examined the captured Jeep were surprised by its humanity, not in the emotional sense, but in its design philosophy. It wasn't made for prestige. It was made for people. Every lever, switch, and bolt had purpose. Every soldier could learn to fix it with a wrench and a hammer. For a military culture that placed engineering perfection above practicality, this approach was alien. German vehicles were built for performance. American ones were built for survival. That distinction, subtle as it seemed, revealed the psychological gap between the two armies. One believed in mastery of the machine. The other believed in mastery through numbers and endurance. When the generals peered inside that captured Jeep, they weren't just seeing an engine. They were seeing the face of a new kind of soldier, one who relied not on complexity, but on trust in simple, reliable tools. By 1943, warfare had changed. The old logic of fixed positions and heavy armor was being rewritten by mobility. The Jeep stood at the heart of that transformation. It was not a fighting vehicle in the traditional sense. It didn't carry heavy guns or thick armor. But tactically, it multiplied the effectiveness of every unit it served. In the North African desert, it acted as the connective tissue of the Allied advance. Scout patrols, moving far ahead of the main columns, used jeeps to slip through ravines, skirt enemy lines, and map terrain for advancing tanks. Commanders used them to link artillery units, engineers, and supply convoys, all moving in fluid coordination. The result was an army that seemed omnipresent, always moving, always ready. German observers, trained to see warfare through the lens of tank divisions and armored assaults, found the idea both fascinating and troubling. To them, mobility belonged to mechanized columns, not to small, scattered vehicles. Yet the Americans had turned mobility into a philosophy. They accepted the vulnerability of light vehicles in exchange for speed and reach. In battle after battle, the Jeep's tactical role deepened. In Sicily, it led reconnaissance missions through mountain passes where tanks couldn't go. In Normandy, it became the first Allied vehicle to roll through liberated villages. It could be fitted with a .30 caliber machine gun for quick raids, or with stretchers to evacuate the wounded under fire. It was, in every sense, the war's most flexible instrument. When the German generals watched the Jeep skim across the sand during their inspection, they couldn't help but see what it represented. A new kind of warfare. Decentralized, fast, improvisational. In the rigid hierarchy of the Wehrmacht, such fluidity was almost heretical. Yet it was precisely what made the Allies unstoppable. To the engineers who examined the Jeep, the most astonishing discovery wasn't its strength or its power. It was its absence of weakness. Every part was optimized not for perfection, but for production. The steel was unpolished but tough. The engine used standardized bolts. The electrical system was minimal, just enough to do the job, no more. What truly startled the Germans was interchangeability. Ford's insistence that every component, from spark plugs to axles, could fit into any Jeep on any front was unheard of in their production system. German factories, burdened by precision and variety, could not match this scale. A field unit could cannibalize 3 wrecked Jeeps to repair a 4th in an hour. Spare parts fit perfectly, regardless of which plant built them. This standardization was the industrial manifestation of American doctrine. Fight anywhere, fix anything, keep moving. The engineers also noted the 4-wheel drive system. Robust, simple, and capable of pulling the small car up slopes that even armored half-tracks found impossible. The Willys' Go Devil engine, though modest in power, had torque that defied expectation. When paired with lightweight design, it produced an agility unmatched by any German equivalent. As one German report later summarized, the American small reconnaissance car combines the advantages of high mobility with an economy of construction that reflects a purely industrial understanding of war. That, phrase, "industrial understanding of war," would echo through the halls of Berlin in the months to come. For the German war machine, still bound by craftsmanship and specialization, it was a quiet admission that the future of warfare belonged not to the most refined, but to the most reproducible. And as the desert sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand, the captured jeep sat surrounded by officers taking notes. Its engine ticked softly as it cooled, a humble sound that carried a message louder than any artillery barrage. The laughter of the morning was gone now, replaced by something else. Not fear exactly, but recognition. The realization that this small, open car was more than a curiosity. It was a symbol of an industrial empire whose strength could not be measured in tanks alone. The generals would soon order a full technical report, but the story of what they discovered, and what it revealed about the balance of power, was only beginning. When the captured jeep was brought to divisional headquarters, the highest-ranking officers took immediate interest. German generals, steeped in doctrine and tradition, approached the vehicle with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. To them, it looked almost laughable, a toy among the steel beasts of their panzer divisions. Yet, the simplicity of its design belied an operational philosophy they could not ignore. General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, who had commanded in Tunisia, reportedly inspected similar Allied vehicles with meticulous attention. Observers noted that he walked around the jeep repeatedly, touching its bodywork, peering under the chassis, and even asking the mechanics to demonstrate its four-wheel drive. Each feature he examined: modular parts, compact engine, storage for supplies, challenged what he believed a combat vehicle should be. The leadership lesson was clear. American commanders did not rely solely on firepower. They leveraged mobility, adaptability, and industrial consistency to extend their reach. German generals, conditioned to favor tanks and heavy armor as symbols of dominance, faced an uncomfortable truth. This tiny machine multiplied the effectiveness of an army in ways their own doctrine could not match. By the time the generals returned to their maps and briefings, they were already recalibrating expectations. No longer was the jeep a joke. It was a strategic puzzle, an operational edge that demanded a response. One of the most understated advantages of the jeep lay in logistics. Allied planners understood that a battle vehicle was only as useful as the ability to keep it moving. With mass production underway across multiple factories in the U.S., every jeep on the front could be replaced or repaired with minimal delay. Parts were standardized, assembly lines were fast, and supply chains stretched from Detroit to North Africa without interruption. The Germans, in contrast, were constrained by a different reality. Precision engineering required time. Each panzer, each half-track, each armored car demanded specialized parts, trained mechanics, and factory capacity that was increasingly vulnerable to Allied bombing. When they saw the jeep, they recognized a vehicle that could operate almost independently. Small, self-sufficient, and surprisingly robust, every small advantage in maintenance translated into operational superiority. A unit could lose several jeeps, cannibalize them, and have functioning vehicles within hours. Fuel efficiency was higher than heavier armored cars, allowing patrols to cover greater distances without resupply. For the Wehrmacht struggling in extended desert lines or rugged Sicilian terrain, the Americans' logistical philosophy was as formidable as any tank or gun. The captured jeep became an example in German reports, a demonstration of how industrial capacity, standardization, and practicality could directly translate to battlefield dominance. Officers were forced to consider not only the jeep itself, but the massive infrastructure that enabled it to function at scale. Perhaps the most profound impact of the captured jeep was psychological. Soldiers and officers who initially dismissed it as insignificant soon realized the magnitude of what they were seeing. Laughter turned to awe, then to unease, as the simplicity and ingenuity of the vehicle sank in. For German officers, there was an implicit humiliation in witnessing the Americans' approach to war. Their doctrine emphasized perfection and engineering elegance. The Americans emphasized speed, efficiency, and redundancy. In a matter of hours, a single Jeep had revealed the flaws in a mindset that valued form over function. The psychological effect extended beyond the generals. Reports circulated among frontline units. The Americans could advance with vehicles that required minimal maintenance, cross terrain that German tanks found impossible, and maintain communications with unparalleled reliability. The Wehrmacht began to internalize a new fear. They were facing an enemy who could recover from setbacks faster than anticipated, who could replace losses almost immediately, and whose technological simplicity belied operational power. Even within the engineers tasked with dismantling the Jeep, a sense of reluctant admiration took hold. They documented every feature meticulously, not to replicate it immediately, but to understand how such a small machine could embody principles the Germans had long overlooked. It was both an intelligence triumph and a moral blow, a humbling moment that underscored the Allies' industrial and tactical superiority. As dusk fell over the desert, the captured Jeep sat surrounded by notebooks, measuring tapes, and skeptical glances. The laughter of the morning had long vanished. In its place was quiet calculation and a growing understanding. A small vehicle could carry enormous influence on the battlefield, not through guns or armor, but through the people who trusted it, the commanders who coordinated with it, and the psychological ripple it created among the enemy. The insights gained here would directly inform German intelligence reports, and later, the strategic assessments sent to Berlin. But beyond reports and numbers, a human story had unfolded, one of surprise, respect, and the dawning realization that mobility, simplicity, and production efficiency could rival firepower in shaping the outcome of war. The next chapter of this story would unfold not in laboratories or offices, but on the battlefield itself, where the Jeep's role in Allied operations would be tested under fire and its full significance revealed. April 23, 1943. The morning sun burned across the rolling sands outside El Getter, Tunisia. German units, retreating after successive Allied advances, were stretched thin. Reconnaissance reports had already hinted at an unusual American mobility, but the true source remained unclear. It was here, in the chaos of a skirmish, that the U.S. II Corps lost one of its own. Not to destruction, but to capture. A small convoy of jeeps, carrying officers and dispatches, had scouted ahead of the main Allied column. Sand and dust hid their movement until a German panzer scout unit intercepted them. Several vehicles were destroyed or immobilized, but one Jeep, abandoned by its driver to avoid capture, remained largely intact. Its small frame, coated with fine Sahara dust, seemed inconsequential, until German engineers pried open the hood and examined the engine. Lieutenant Karl Brenner, a young officer tasked with inspecting captured vehicles, recalled later, "We laughed at first. It looked like a child's toy. But the moment we touched the engine, the frame, the transmission, everything changed. It was astonishing in its simplicity." German generals were summoned to the site, curious to see the machine that had already become legendary in whispered reports from the front. General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim personally arrived, followed by several senior staff officers and mechanical specialists. They walked around the Jeep, noting the lightweight steel frame, compact engine, and the ingenious placement of storage racks. Every detail spoke of purpose. Nothing was decorative, nothing wasted. The examination began systematically. First, the engine, a 2.2-liter Go Devil 4-cylinder, capable of 60 horsepower. Modest on paper, but optimized for reliability. It started immediately with the turn of a key, its smooth hum a testament to precision mass production. German mechanics had never encountered a vehicle with such resilience under dust, heat, and stress. Next came the suspension and axles. Engineers jacked the Jeep and tested the wheel articulation. The small machine climbed rocks, rolled over ruts, and survived impacts that would have shattered heavier half-tracks. It was both nimble and sturdy, a paradox that unsettled experienced German technicians. Inside, the cockpit revealed more surprises. Every switch, lever, and gauge was intuitive. The simple dashboard allowed a soldier to operate the Jeep under stress without training in complex machinery. The seating was minimalist yet practical. Canvas stretched over a metal frame, easy to remove, repair, or replace. But the greatest shock came when the radio compartment was discovered. A compact SCR 300 unit, fully functional, was tucked neatly under the passenger seat. It allowed communication over miles of desert without cumbersome cables or heavy equipment. German officers, who relied on larger, fragile systems, stared in disbelief. One whispered, This is genius." After a demonstration of the Jeep's mobility, General von Arnim ordered several officers to drive it over a sand ridge. Laughter erupted initially as the generals imagined the machine tipping, stalling, or braking. Instead, it bounded over uneven terrain with ease. The engine roared quietly, its frame absorbed shocks without complaint, and the vehicle rolled to a stop with perfect control. The mood shifted from amusement to respect. Then, unease. One general muttered, "A toy that could destroy us." By mid-afternoon, the Germans were recording detailed sketches and measurements. Every aspect of the Jeep was analyzed: the modularity of parts, the simplicity of maintenance, the placement of fuel and storage, and the adaptability for combat roles. The psychological impact was immediate. Soldiers who had once dismissed the Americans as inexperienced and overconfident now understood that their opponent's strength lay not just in firepower, but in ingenuity and industrial capacity. The captured Jeep was proof that the U.S. Army could move faster, recover quicker, and operate with a flexibility unmatched by the Wehrmacht. For the first time, the generals realized that the war they were fighting was no longer just about tanks, guns, and terrain. It was about mobility, efficiency, and adaptability. Concepts embodied in a vehicle no larger than some of their own staff cars. The day after the Jeep's capture, German headquarters began to fully grasp its implications. Engineers and officers compiled reports, detailing not only the vehicle's construction, but the philosophy it represented. By now, the initial laughter had faded entirely. In its place was a sober understanding that the Allies' mobility doctrine could not be ignored. The report noted 3 key operational advantages: speed, versatility, and reliability. A single Jeep could transport officers, deliver ammunition, evacuate the wounded, or carry reconnaissance equipment across terrain that stalled German armored units. Its small size and 4-wheel drive allowed access to mountain passes, riverbeds, and desert dunes, areas where German vehicles could not operate without significant risk. Each discovery challenged long-held beliefs about mechanized warfare. German tactical units began to observe Allied movements with new concern. Patrols reported that Jeeps often appeared ahead of main columns, sometimes emerging from locations thought impossible to reach. Commanders realized that these vehicles allowed Americans to concentrate forces rapidly, relay orders efficiently, and maintain operational tempo even under harsh conditions. At divisional headquarters, generals convened to discuss immediate responses. They considered design modifications to their own vehicles, increased reconnaissance, and revised patrol strategies. Yet the reality was clear. The Americans had not only engineered a vehicle, they had engineered an advantage. One officer noted privately, "They have multiplied their presence with machines that seem almost invisible. Every Jeep carries the possibility of outmaneuvering us." Reports also circulated to Berlin. The Heereswaffenamt analyzed the Jeep in terms of production, maintenance, and tactical employment. German planners recognized that even if they replicated the design, the scale of American industrial capacity made it impossible to match quickly. While a panzer required weeks to build and specialized mechanics to maintain, a jeep could be produced in days and repaired by any soldier with basic tools. The psychological impact extended beyond officers. Soldiers in forward positions expressed astonishment at the sheer number of small vehicles they now faced. Accounts from captured Germans mentioned the relentless presence of jeeps during engagements, patrols appearing from multiple directions, evacuations conducted before German reinforcements could respond, and officers coordinating movements with unprecedented efficiency. The vehicle's modest size belied the operational reach it provided. By early May 1943, these observations translated into tactical adjustments. German units began to prioritize disabling or capturing jeeps whenever possible. Ambushes were set to intercept small reconnaissance parties, and supply convoys were rerouted to avoid areas where jeeps were active. Despite these efforts, the Americans maintained their tempo. Each captured or destroyed jeep was replaced by another, a reflection of industrial output and logistical planning that German units could not hope to counter fully. The captured jeep also informed German assessments of Allied doctrine. Reports highlighted the U.S. emphasis on decentralization and rapid decision-making. Smaller, mobile units capable of operating independently but linked through communications and support. This approach contrasted sharply with German doctrine, which relied on concentrated armored formations and meticulous chain-of-command coordination. The jeep was both a tool and a symbol, a demonstration of doctrine made tangible. Field officers noted one final critical aspect: morale. Soldiers observed that American troops seemed invigorated by the presence of these vehicles, confident in their ability to move, strike, or retreat with minimal risk. German troops, conversely, faced a growing sense of frustration and vulnerability. The psychological burden of chasing elusive, mobile enemies intensified the stress of already arduous campaigns. In retrospect, historians would argue that the capture of a single jeep encapsulated a broader lesson. Warfare in World War II had become as much about industrial output, adaptability, and logistics as it was about firepower or tactical skill. A small, simple vehicle could expose weaknesses in an entire army's approach, forcing reassessment and adaptation under pressure. As the Tunisian campaign drew to a close, the captured jeep remained in German custody, meticulously documented, tested, and analyzed. Yet its ultimate significance lay not in its presence, but in the understanding it provoked. By revealing the Americans' ability to produce, deploy, and utilize light vehicles at scale, it exposed an operational philosophy Germany had failed to anticipate. The desert wind swept over the abandoned battlefield, carrying the dust of lost tanks and trucks. The jeep, small and unarmored, had quietly demonstrated the future of mechanized warfare. And for those who had laughed at it, the realization lingered. A modest vehicle, designed for reliability and speed, had how they saw the enemy and the war itself. The immediate aftermath of the jeep's capture was a mixture of operational reassessment, intelligence reporting, and growing apprehension among German forces in North Africa. Although a single vehicle could not win a campaign, it served as a tangible example of American ingenuity, mobility, and industrial philosophy, all of which had profound implications for both sides. Reports sent from divisional headquarters to Berlin highlighted the jeep's simplicity, versatility, and reliability. German engineers noted its modular construction, ease of repair, and robustness across difficult terrain. The vehicle required neither specialized mechanics nor complex tools, making it exceptionally well suited for rapid deployment in a theater where supply lines were stretched and conditions were harsh. The captured jeep also forced German commanders to reconsider their approach to reconnaissance and communications. Previously, small units relied on motorcycles, armored cars, or light trucks, each limited by fuel, terrain, or maintenance demands. The jeep's combination of speed, durability, and multi-role capability revealed a new standard for mobility. Reports urged the deployment of more agile vehicles, faster communication, and flexible tactics to counter the Americans' growing operational reach. Beyond logistics and tactics, the vehicle left a psychological impression. Soldiers and officers who initially dismissed it as a trivial novelty began to appreciate its implications. Some records describe a sense of unease and reluctant admiration. The Americans had engineered a tool that combined human adaptability with industrial efficiency. Every patrol, every reconnaissance mission, every supply run conducted by jeeps demonstrated the cumulative effect of a doctrine built around speed, reliability, and adaptability. Meanwhile, U.S. commanders remained unaware of the jeep's capture for several days. Field reports emphasized continuous mobility, rapid communication, and logistical efficiency, all of which allowed the Allies to maintain pressure on retreating Axis forces. In reality, the Germans' inspection of a single jeep underscored a critical weakness. They could not easily replicate or counter a production system that enabled countless vehicles to perform similar functions simultaneously across multiple theaters. The capture also prompted small-scale adaptations. Engineers experimented with mounting weapons, increasing fuel capacity, and improving maintenance routines, lessons gleaned from a vehicle already optimized for field conditions. Although the Germans could not mass-produce equivalents, the exercise offered insights into Allied operational philosophy and foreshadowed the industrial-scale advantages the U.S. would later bring to Europe. In essence, the Jeep's capture highlighted a shift in warfare. Combat was no longer solely defined by heavy armor or artillery. Mobility, versatility, and industrial foresight had become equally decisive. And while it took time for German command to fully internalize this lesson, the examination of a single vehicle revealed that America's strength was multiplying quietly but relentlessly across the battlefield. Chapter 1. The stage was now set for a broader understanding. The captured Jeep was not an isolated anomaly. It represented a philosophy that, when applied at scale, would help tip the balance of war in favor of the Allies. The Jeep exemplified American philosophy: simplicity, reliability, and versatility. Soldiers trusted it. Commanders leveraged it. German engineers learned the limits of precision over pragmatism. The vehicle's impact extended beyond a single skirmish. It represented industrial foresight, human-centered design, and operational doctrine that prioritized adaptability. The Jeep was a reminder that warfare is won not only by firepower or armor, but by machines and strategies that endure, empower, and multiply the effectiveness of those who wield them. In the sands of Tunisia, a humble vehicle quietly reshaped the understanding of war, proving that sometimes the smallest machines carry the greatest influence.